Hello, welcome everyone as you're coming in. We're so grateful to have you here for Microaggressions, What I Say and How I Say It. I'm Tara McVoy. I'm the marketing manager at Grace Hill, and I'll be your behind the scenes MC today. We're going to take just a moment to let people roll in. We have a lot of participants today. We're very excited to have you all here. While we're getting started, we're curious to know who all is here and where you're from, not only your organization, but where across the country. So if you don't mind dropping that into the chat, we'll give it just about 30 to 45 seconds to have everyone able to get settled in. Brandy from Atlanta, hi, we're glad you're here. Stone Mountain, Georgia, lots of folks from the Atlanta area. Thanks for being here. Denver, Texas.
Wow.
My goodness, so many. Philadelphia, Colorado, a couple people from Colorado. We're thrilled and delighted that you all are here. And as we have quite a bit of content to cover today, and this will be a conversation that will include not just you all and utilizing the chat to add some of your feedback, but also really great dialogue between our two speakers. So let me go ahead and bring them in today. We have with us Melissa D. White, who is the principal coach and consultant with the Activation Hour. She's a certified coach trainer. She's done webinars with us before at Grace Hill, and we're so grateful to have her expertise. Also is Stephanie Anderson, who is the manager of industry operations at the National Apartment Association. Stephanie's done a lot of work with us as well, and we're so grateful to have you too. Thank you both for everything you've done here. I'm going to let you take it away and say a little bit more about why this is an important conversation for us to have today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. Thank you, Grace Hill. And I am excited and honored that we can continue this dialogue. I know over the last few months, everyone has been hit with a lot of webinars and information, and you guys have shown up and in numbers, and that lets us know that you want more of this. So thank you so much. Again, I'm Melissa D. White, principal coach of the Activation Hour, and also the operations director at the Cool Source. And this was vital for me. I can't even just say important. It's vital because having very clearly defined definitions in that diversity and inclusion space is important. When we can identify, then we can fix and rectify the situation. And microaggressions has very rarely been talked about in this whole conversation of DE&I. And so we want to first help you guys know what it is, how to recognize it, how to avoid it, and how to be aware. And so I'm excited to be joined by my amazing co-facilitator here, Stephanie. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for answering the call to join us today.
Melissa, it's a complete honor. I am just blown away by the response. Thank you all for joining us today. It's truly so great that Grace Hill is really so passionate about this topic, as Melissa and I am. As Tara mentioned, I've been in the industry for almost 15 years now. I've been serving just over 2 years for the National Apartment Association as their manager for industry operations. I started at the site level and have worked all the way up through director roles. And this is something I'm super passionate about, as well as Melissa. I think specifically, as Melissa said, microaggressions is something that is out there. It is completely relevant to our current climate, but yet rarely talked about. And so we have so many different opportunities to really talk about diversity and inclusion and helping to educate our peers and having these uncomfortable conversations to bring awareness. But for me, this is just a topic I think that so many of us experience on a daily basis. And so we're really going to address that today, as Melissa said, just talking about some of those definitions, better understanding what microaggressions are. And I think many of you may even be surprised that you've experienced that over your years. And then the best part, I think, is really starting to talk about resolutions. How do we really overcome that and move forward? And so I'm super excited to be here today. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we want to make sure we identify for you what you will take away from the conversation with myself and Stephanie today. The first thing is to identify. a microaggression. So let me be honest, albeit microaggressions happen around me all the time. And Stephanie, I just found out you and I have very similar backgrounds in the industry, same amount of years, 15, 16 years, starting out on site. So we've seen every level from being on site to corporate to just some national opportunities. And at every level, it's prevalent, and not just at work, but at home and in our everyday lives, which we'll touch on. And I knew it happened, but I didn't know it had a name for years. So it's very important that we call it by name so we can call it out effectively. The second thing is to establish and then redirect healthy communication and dialogue. That there's some things we say that we may have very good intent, and we may be inquisitive about people, their backgrounds, or their situation. However, it's how we frame that conversation and being aware of potential offenses when we ask certain questions or say certain things. And then the third point of understanding the impact. And we can't be blind to the fact, whether you have intent of offense or not, that the impact, the emotional ramifications of how that affects your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors is highly important to keep the relationships intact, right? And then the last one, know the steps needed to turn a microaggression into macro awareness. And at the end, we have a very special surprise on how we want to be macro aware and help us be aware of what we say matters.
Melissa mentioned it earlier, and it's really important to say that there is so much information out there. And I don't ever want to say overeducate, because I don't think you can ever be educated enough on anything in the world. But, given the current climate that we're in, it is super, super important that we really continue to have these conversations. And so Melissa and I thought this graphic was super fun, not to make light of the situation by any means, but, with so much training out there, whether it's on a national level or from consulting companies, and of course, hopefully within your respectable companies as well, these conversations are taking place a lot, and these trainings are taking place. And so how fun is it that, sorry, Starbucks, they're closed. They're going to have all these different trainings out there: racial sensitivity training, gender sensitivity training, ageism, progressive, micro-progressive, disability training, right? There's so many opportunities to bring awareness and to get more information. And then we can't forget for Sundays, Earth Day to celebrate. So we thought that this was kind of a fun graphic to just show that we know you're inundated with information, but what we're going to share with you today is super, super important, because what you say does really matter.
Absolutely. So we want to get a temperature check from you all. This is the crowd participation portion of our session today. We know just from our own personal experiences, regardless of ethnicity, gender, cultural background, microaggressions are not exclusive to any one of those. If you're in a marginalized category in any way, 9 times out of 10, you have been exposed to on a receiving end of a microaggression. We want to do a temperature check here. So Tara, if you would, let's run our poll and get a sense of how we recognize and respond to a microaggression.
Fantastic. I'm launching the poll now.
So guys, here's where we need your help. We see hundreds of you all over the country. We want to hear from you. Answer yes or no, or if you're unsure, I feel confident addressing a microaggression when it occurs. I'm confident in addressing a microaggression when it occurs. So Stephanie, as they're filling this out, when we were preparing for our webinar, I ran this same question by my own team. So it was very interesting that many didn't know what a microaggression was, but when I threw out examples, they said, oh, I've heard that before. Or things that may not necessarily been a racial microaggression. They said, maybe if it was about disability or cultural awareness, they did not know. Like, I didn't know I couldn't say that. So this is important.
And that's such a great point, Melissa. The one thing I thought about when I thought about microaggressions was a dig. Like, how somebody kind of puts a dig at you?
Yeah.
That is how I relate this to someone who doesn't know that they would apply to having a microaggression or having experienced it.
So
well,
true.
we've had a great deal of good answers coming in. I want to give about 3 more seconds. If there's anybody who hasn't gotten to the poll and wants to fill it out.
Man, I tried to vote. I
Exactly.
couldn't get my vote in. We're not eligible.
I know. I did the same thing too. I did the
Well,
same.
we'll wrap it up now. I'm going to end it, and you'll be possibly surprised, maybe not, to see what our answers are.
Okay, the suspense. Let's see. Interesting. So 32% said yes. 15% said no. Here's the astounding one. More than half of you, 53% said you're not sure, which is why you're here today.
Yes.
Exactly.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, good stuff. Next poll, Tara.
The next thing that we wanted to do was to hear from folks in the chat if they themselves have seen or experienced, if there's something when you hear microaggression and something leaps immediately to mind, like, oh, I know for sure that was one. We were just interested in getting a look at what you all from the audience may have already seen. You may not be positive from our poll how to respond, but have you seen or encountered one? Has one happened to you? Has one happened to someone that you know? Have you seen one on a show? A good question from Vincent,
I
like,
see.
is it passive aggressive statement?
It can be.
Anthony wanted to know that as well.
Yeah, I'll drop some examples. So Stephanie, remember in our promo for our webinar today, we put a few word bubbles and word clouds out there to help you guys kind of identify it. So it could be passive aggressive, or like Stephanie said, it could be a playful dig, but it could be offensive if they don't really take it as a joke. So something like, you're so smart. I get that a lot. And albeit, thank you for the compliment. It's kind of a, okay, if is everyone in my position smart enough to be here? So that could be one. Stephanie, what's maybe one that you've experienced as well?
I actually experienced one this past week. I was sharing with Tara the other day, and me being a working parent and a woman in the industry, I do have those obstacles to overcome. And so I actually had a colleague that wanted to set up a meeting, and they meant nothing bad by it, but they said, "Well, can you do this time? I know you have kids at home, and you're doing that thing." And while their intention was pure gold, right, it was immediate dig that I can't do my job 100%, or that I can't possibly commit to set standard hours during the day because it's COVID and I have 3 children at home. And so something so small like that really had an impact on me.
Wow, and I've experienced the opposite. As a single woman in our industry, there have been times when they say, "Oh, well, you're single. You can take this workload home. You
Absolutely.
really." Or people have assumed that I was married and said, "Hey, what does your husband think?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I haven't met him yet." So,
Exactly.
or assuming that whatever my orientation is or whatever, it seems innocent enough, but we just want to be aware. Alexandra said, "I had someone say you speak so well, and I wasn't expecting that." It definitely catches us off guard. Carol says, "My boss gave me a compliment on my attitude and suggested that perhaps my meds had kicked in." Again, and here's the thing, that's one that we'll get to about mental health microaggressions, because it's not a visible disability or impairment, so you don't know what someone's status is. And then Anthony says, working with residents for 18 years. Well, they're rolling in. Let me try to keep up with the comments. For 18 years, I've been on the receiving end. Oftentimes we may be on the receiving end, especially when we're on the front line with the client or the customer. Tracy says, yeah, I've come across the "you should be a basketball player, not a leasing agent."
I love that one because they're totally picking on the fact that I'm sure, she's tall and beautiful, right?
Right.
But because she's tall, she could be better suited in that field.
Mm-hmm. And Shalia says, someone touching my hair without asking. Been there, done
The
that.
hair one is a big, big thing for you and I, Melissa.
We've talked about that. You have dogs. Can you walk the resident's dog for her? What? That's a new one. So this is good. We're gonna move on. Keep these rolling because some of you, 30% of you will believe some of these questions are already shedding light and you're opening your, I have heard that, or I didn't even know that may be the wrong thing to say. So that's really good. Okay. So Stephanie, Here's the time for us to really have some honest candor about what a microaggression is. What do you say?
For me, a microaggression really is that dig that I spoke about earlier. It's something that can be extremely subtle and can still have good intentions, but it is meant to really deflect on a certain situation, whether it be a person's age, what they look like, their ethnicity, their sexuality, and really just making assumptions, right, about what we think that they should or should not be doing. And sometimes I will say that microaggressions, it was mentioned in the chat, which I love this, it doesn't have to necessarily be words. Someone mentioned earlier about body language and tone. I did a lot of new construction in the industry for many years, and catcalling it's a real thing. And when you are walking around and an area where people don't see you necessarily as the businesswoman you believe that you are walking in, and they are literally whistling and making derogatory statements and comments, I mean, that is a microaggression, right? Making me feel uncomfortable, out of place, and calling me out of my name or character.
That's so good. And I like that you reference the different types of microaggressions, even as women or gender related. So I want to go into some of the technical terminology about what it is. So here are several forms of microaggressions. Verbal. Examples that you've heard us use already. You're so smart, for a woman or for a Black woman or for a child. It could be ageism, just it could be depending on the context and who you're talking to. Okay. Can also be behavioral. Okay. And it oftentimes is sometimes it's intentional, without meaning offense, but you're intentionally discriminating, as in this case, where a bartender would ignore a transgender person instead of serving a cisgender person, or any, and really, although it says transgender, you can insert any marginalized person or population in here. If you're not giving equal or equitable service or care to someone, that's a behavioral microaggression. Okay. And then the last form is environmental. We're hearing this a lot lately, Stephanie, because of, especially for me, I live in the South. So we have monuments that are coming down, buildings being renamed, and that's considered an environmental microaggression. Say a college campus where buildings have been named after white people, historical figures. However, they're historical figures of many other ethnicities and backgrounds that have made great contributions. And so those are the three forms of microaggressions. Have you seen any of those carried out in other arenas as well?
Oh, a ton. The first one that comes to my mind with environmental, as we really talk about places of learning where people should feel very inclusive and comfortable, and that they should be able to engage in learning without feeling like they just can't be themselves. A local high school and middle school had names that were based on history that is in my county. And the NAACP had to get involved and file a lawsuit against the county because they did not want to change the names because of the extensive matter behind it for financial reasons. And long story short, it has now been changed. We officially have two new names. And while my children did not go to those schools, it was really important for that inclusiveness, for people to feel like it's a safe place because it was based on history. And we were pretty much honoring those from the Confederate area. And so while someone like myself, who is white, may not have found that to be offensive, my friends who were of marginalized persons felt that way. And so we should all stand up for those types of things, whether we're directly affected by it or not. And so kudos to them for actually making a change. But yeah, I mean, it's happening all over. And Melissa, I'm sure you'll agree, it's going to continue to get bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. And that's why advocacy matters. What message does that now send to younger generations about having a voice and being involved in that process? Other facets of microaggressions to be aware of, I showed you the types. Now, here's foundational information of the definition and other implications of microaggressions. The textbook definition is a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously and unintentionally expresses a prejudice, okay? attitude towards a member of a marginalized group. So it is a prejudice statement. And what we've learned, honestly, in all of these conversations is that prejudice is not just black or white. It's not. And we have to be aware of that. So a micro assault. Micro assault means it's intentional, direct discrimination or prejudice, okay? Even if not intending to offend. I'll give you an example, Stephanie. When I was in college at Valdosta State in South Georgia, one of my jobs after class was working at a hotel, and I worked the front desk. And I had an older gentleman, a Caucasian gentleman, elderly, and again, we're in South Georgia, and he paid a compliment to my manager and said, "Oh, the colored girl at the counter was really helpful. She was nice." Although wrapped in a compliment, that was a major micro.
Right.
I just kind of grinned and smiled. Now, because I smiled, that didn't make it okay. I did so for the comfort of the person,
Right.
but to the detriment of my own offense.
I call that a backhanded compliment. But yeah, and so we're gonna talk about that in a little bit, right, Melissa, in terms of how you address these. But that's me, that's my personality too, is to smile, because even though it's not okay, you want to make them feel you want to make them feel comfortable without making yourself feel more uncomfortable, right?
That's so true. Micro insults. This one is unintentional discrimination, as such as you and I talked about familiar status, intellect, things of that nature. And then the last one, micro invalidation, undermines another person's experiences. So the best example I found from that one in Medical Today News, they said basically a micro invalidation is when a person's comment invalidates or undermines their experiences. For example, it could be a white person that says, "Oh, racism doesn't exist anymore," because that may not have been your direct experience. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist in the world. So I have to be very mindful of not totally invalidating someone else's human experience. Okay.
I don't see color, Melissa. That's
I
probably
don't see color. That's a popular one. Excellent example, Stephanie. I hear that a lot. Okay. So Stephanie, how does exposure to other cultures or groups bring awareness to microaggressions?
This is a really great question. And I immediately think about people don't know what they don't know. And so a lot of times negativity spawns when you have situations where people feel uncomfortable or they just don't have enough awareness or knowledge about something. And so typically when people feel uncomfortable is when they put those barriers up and they get aggressive. And so it's sort of like if someone is being mean to someone else, it's usually a direct reflection of their character or something going on in their life that's causing them to act or feel a certain way. So when I think about exposure to cultures and groups, I think about opportunity to really bring awareness. I want to give a great example. There is a company in our industry, Bazzuto, and I think they do a really good job at this, where they have cultural awareness, where they have employees bring food in from their own backgrounds, and they talk about where they're from, and they talk about what their heritage is about. And so it's really about bridging the gaps, right? And not just bringing awareness, but bringing a comfort level in those conversations. And by getting people together and talking about it in a very comforting manner, and then eating some good comfort food from a particular culture, it really makes people feel better about it, and it encourages them to, instead of making accusations or having a certain perspective, they are asking questions, and they are engaging in those questions to find the answers that help them to better understand.
Before we move to this one, we had a question, and I'd like to get your take on it, Stephanie. Thelma asked, how would you change or respond to someone saying, "I don't see color"? Because people feel like, for many, they were taught, hey, that's a safe response.
It is
How do
safe.
you maybe shift or reframe that statement?
It's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that, Thelma. You know, for me, I think that when you tell someone that you don't see their color, you don't see them for them, and you're not fully looking at them. And I do equate that to someone saying that they don't see me as a white woman with dirty blonde hair, right? They're not acknowledging every part of me and everything that I am. And so I think that while people have many people have good intentions when they say I don't see color, I think it's important to say I want you to see color, and this is why, and explain to them about the beauty of color and the beauty of those differences. And that's kind of what makes the world go round. And so I really think that people do say it, like Melissa said, to be safe. And I think that they say it too because they don't know any better. If you asked this Stephanie 10 years ago, I probably would have told you that because I was raised in a multicultural neighborhood, and I was actually the minority in the neighborhood that I was raised in. And so to me, it felt like I truly didn't see color because no one looked like me in my neighborhood. No one looked anything like me. And that was okay. But now I've realized in the past decade how I'm really devaluing people by not addressing that.
Thank you for shining light on your own awareness and shift. That's so important to share those vulnerable moments. So here's a fun clip. I love finding things in current culture, pop culture, and media that are examples. We're going to show you guys how this topic is being addressed in mainstream media. One of my favorite shows, Blackest. Let's check out this small clip where Bo, the main character, has experienced microaggression on many levels at work and at home.
Mommy, that's not an easy surgery for anesthesiologist. Thank you, Dr. Cole. I just put him to sleep and then woke him up again mid-surgery and then put him back to sleep and made sure he didn't die. So it was nothing. I don't know much about you. What's your story? Where'd you go to medical school? USC. Huh. Yeah. Wow, that's a really good school. Yeah. Good for you. Good for me. Did you hear what Dr. Cole said to me at the party?
What do you mean?
You were standing right there.
Mm-hmm.
I said I went to USC, and she was like, wow, that's such a good school. Good for you.
Well, USC is a really good school, and you went there, and that is good for you.
Yeah, but did you hear the way she said it? She acted surprised that I got in. You know what it means when people say good for you, don't you? Come on. It means they have low expectations. They think I got in because of the diversity slot. Mm-hmm.
Don't you think you might be reading a lot into that?
No, I think that's a textbook microaggression. How often do people ask you what school you went to?
Not a lot, and that's a good thing because people are not reassured when they hear Medical College of Tobago, South Campus.
The what?
Yeah, the look on their faces, they just go, well, listen, I think she was just trying to pay you a compliment. Maybe you're being a little too sensitive.
I'm being too sensitive? Yeah. That's your takeaway?
Yeah, you know, sometimes things are just what they are on face value, okay? Have a good rest of your day. And what I mean by that is, have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, I get it. It's very funny. Unbelievable. This surgeon said something to me that I think was kind of racist, but no one else could see it.
What did he say?
She.
She.
Yes, Ruby. Women can be doctors.
Not my doctor.
So that clip is so much to unpack, Stephanie. Everything from race, ethnicity, gender, but they did it in a way of humor. But what I appreciate is that it was an honest dialogue between two colleagues. And what the male doctor said about, oh, don't be so sensitive. That just, I cringed and my heart broke because it was like, wait, is she being sensitive or is she now being vulnerable and transparent, hoping for empathy?
Yeah, I mean, I think this clip shows really well that perception is reality, right? Because how she views something is very different than her colleague and how he views it. But I think what I take the most from this is, especially as a woman, Melissa, you can probably relate to this here, when people say you're just being overly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, oh, you're putting you're overthinking, you're putting way too much into it. And you know, that's a slippery slope.
It is a slippery slope. You know, I've learned, Stephanie, over the years, you know, it is a lot for us to keep up within society with the evolution of how we want to identify. And quite honestly, from the safest, most human and empathetic way I know is to call us by name. Just simply ask, hi, my name's Melissa, what's your name? And then be willing to learn the name, pronounce it in its fullest and correct way, and to start there, because by addressing by first name, it deepens the relationship. It shows true, genuine interest and respect. So whether it's confusion of pronouns, confusion of titles, I think that's one of the most basic places to start. Do you agree?
I agree 110%. Do you know that many people go by their middle names
You said go by
because
name.
people cannot pronounce their first name and they feel more comfortable doing that?
That is a microaggression, whether you all
Yes.
know it or not. That if they say, hey, I can't pronounce that. Do you just have a nickname? Microaggression.
Right? Good example. I love it when we can feel these out and help all of our attendees here to kind of sift through, right? Just the surface and finding some of those.
Mm-hmm. So
Well,
household, family, this was a big one for you. Tell us about your take on household, family, and community awareness.
this is huge for me. I think so many people who know me in the industry or follow me on my platforms know that being a mom is probably one of my biggest accomplishments I've had in my life. And it really is one of the most important jobs I will ever have here on earth. And so to really put forth extra effort in terms of raising these tiny humans and making sure that it starts from the home, because there's so much ugliness out there in the world. And we want to make sure that we're embedding these great roots into them right before we send them off into the world, and raising them to be competent but wonderful human beings all at the same time. And so I really thought this was a great opportunity to talk about household awareness and some of the microaggressions that start so early, even from, I have a toddler at home, and the things that she sees subconsciously that we may not even be aware of. And, when Melissa and I were having a conversation earlier this week, we brought up Disney movies. And it's interesting. I don't want to just pinpoint Disney, of course, but I think it's interesting when, as an adult, I now take the kids to watch movies, and I pick up on things that they would never understand at their age. And it's funny how much adult humor or adult content is located in some of these films. And so when you think about some of the microaggressions, they are there. And I mentioned a couple of them up here, Peter Pan, a big one. Obviously, I put the Little Mermaid up here because she subjects herself to changing to meet a point of view for a man. And I also think it was important to include the Little Mermaid because many of you might have known about this last year when it was going on Broadway, and a beautiful Black woman was chosen to play the lead role of Ariel. And the amount of negativity that circulated throughout the internet and just all social platforms, because people said, no, she has to be white and she has to have, red hair. And because they had this perception of what she was supposed to be. And so it's really important that even Melissa and I talked about, these fairy tale lifestyle and how we really want to know that what they teach you that happens in real life is not real life, right? And especially when it comes to, love and relationships and so forth. I did include the Charlie Brown because this has been another controversial topic. Whether it was intended to or not, you do have poor little Lionel over there, and he's by himself. And, why that was not probably the intention, that he's in a lawn chair and he's African American and he's sitting on the side of the table, but perception is reality and how people viewed that. And they actually did pull that away from several major stations to play that. But one of the things I wanted to quickly share, because this is super important to me, is I use books at home a lot with my children. And this is probably one of my favorite ones. There's so many great ones on Amazon. I'll tell you my other favorite one is They, He, She, Easy as ABC. And that talks about the pronouns that Melissa mentioned earlier, and how even young children need to be aware of pronouns and calling people what their preferred pronouns are. But this book has been a favorite for mine. I actually took it to my daughter's school last year, pre-COVID, when we could visit, and read it to the class. And I didn't really apologize to the teacher, but I kind of told her ahead of time that, like, hey, I have this book. It's a little bit controversial. And she was very progressive and was fine with it. But this book, I could not believe how many children had no idea about the relationships. It's interracial relationships. It's having two moms or two dads. It's having a parent in a wheelchair. It talks about how little Johnny and his family is different from Sally and her family, and as to why, and kind of noticing those differences, but then also embracing them. So I think if you could take anything from the conversation today, just take the awareness, because I think, like we talked about with multicultural differences, if you don't address them and answer children, because children just ask a lot of questions. If you brush it off and move it to the side, they think that that's acceptable. And instead of seeing people for what they are and who they are, and then addressing it so that it feels more normal.
I love that. Just the curiosity of a child, our questions don't go away. We just begin to silence or mute ourselves and hold those things in because we're taught that that's appropriate. And that's why not only, reading to the children, exposing to different things is teaching a healthy way to have dialogue. And here we are as adults trying to relearn that all over again, right?
It's true. Melissa, before we move on too, I know that there's quite a bit of chat that's kind of
I can
happening.
see
And
the
so I do want to acknowledge it just a little bit. The good news is that we are going to, as part of this webinar, we are going to address some solutions and resolutions, right, of how to overcome these conversations. I do appreciate the honest dialogue. I do want everybody to still remain super respectful. This is a tough conversation, and Melissa and I love getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so we want you all to this is a safe space, right, Melissa? But we also want you to embrace what you're learning and what we're talking about, and try to think of things a little bit out of your perspective. Try to put yourself in someone else's shoes as we address some of these things, because I think that's really important.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think also, albeit frustrating for many of us, that this topic is still top of mind. It's not going away. And that we are forced to look in the mirror at ourselves, regardless of race. I think it's very important to approach it with an open mind and an open heart, because it's equally frustrated as you are. Those who are on the receiving end are maybe as frustrated and offended as well. So the goal here is truly understanding and empathy. Thank you for addressing that, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
So, responses. Here's the part of thing everyone's been waiting for. Okay, what is an appropriate response? And we touched on that just now in our statement, but how do we appropriately respond when we experience a microaggression? I want to go back to the clip with Bo from Blackish. I think the way she handled, if you go on to watch that episode, which I encourage you to do so, I think it was in their third season, episode 4. I don't know, you can YouTube it. But when you watch the rest of the episode, the way she did it was such a stellar example. Was one, she said, okay, well, let me check with a colleague to make sure that I'm not picking up an offense that I shouldn't pick up. But when it wasn't met with the appropriate amount of understanding and empathy, then she discussed it with another party. But at the end, she directly confronts it herself respectfully. She just pulls her colleague to the side and said, hey, when you said this, this is how that made me feel. I really want us to work together respectfully. Can we find another way? And I think that is one of the hardest things to do, but it is so necessary if we're to heal and to move forward and have amicable, safe work environments with one another. Any examples of how you may respond, Stephanie, when it comes to a microaggression you've experienced?
I think it's tough. We kind of mentioned earlier, Melissa, in terms of we don't want to make it more uncomfortable for the other person. And for some of us, it is natural to smile. My mom always used to tell me growing up that, and this is hereditary, I do it too, when you get nervous, you kind of laugh because you're uncomfortable and you're trying to find that comfort level again. And so, I think that it's really important to acknowledge it. Oftentimes we apologize for things that we shouldn't be. And how many times, think about that. How many times have you said, I'm sorry for something, because it's natural to come out of your mouth because you're worried about the other person and how their feelings are. So you're like, oh, I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry I said that. When in reality, you're not sorry. And quite frankly, you probably shouldn't be sorry. So I think it is important to acknowledge it. I think it's always about not just what you say, but how you say it, and coming from a good, genuine place. When you're able to talk to people one-on-one and pull them aside and say, this is how this made me feel, and using those feeling words to let people know what's happening, I think it's important, and it is uncomfortable. And especially if the microaggression is coming from someone who is above you. So someone in a C-suite level position, or even your direct supervisor, then what, Melissa? because that adds a whole nother level to it. Not even getting on the HR side, but just thinking about how do you address that?
You know, that I'm often asked that question, Stephanie, about what we call managing up. And it honestly comes from a place of what I call the E3 model. And there's several models of how we handle responses to biases and microaggressions. The first one is express. Express meaning ask for audience to express your thoughts and feelings directly to the person and not indirectly. It's very important to not be indirect or dance around it, because you're doing a disservice to the opportunity to do the second E, which is to educate. You want to educate the person as to why it was offensive, not just the fact that it was, but hey, the part about me taking work home because I'm single, yeah, I do have a life outside of here. I want to enjoy things too. Is there a way we can balance the work here in the office so that we're not biased among the workload or something like that? I mean, to just give an example of why. And then once that's done, look for the opportunity to do the third E, which is evolve. Meaning, how do we now evolve from using the statement, okay, or even how we receive that statement? And honestly, something you said earlier, Stephanie, is so key. And many of my other colleagues in the D&I space, they say, hey, have moments in your workspace of ethnical inclusion, bringing lunches, educating. Maybe it's a day where you wear, hey, a native garment and you educate the team about, hey, this is what these things mean. You may watch a movie and discuss how that affects culture and what the perception is, but be open. The number one key in the E3 model being effective is that you have to be teachable, coachable, and willing to receive it. And it starts from the top down. That if these initiatives are desired and discussed on the other tiers of your organization, however, it's not met with the same excitement, enthusiasm, and follow through on the leadership level, then it's all for naught. It has to come from leaders first so that you tread the way and your team follows suit.
And I have to repeat that because that is so powerful, Melissa, what you just said. It starts from the top. It is really the culture that starts from the leadership and works its way down. And that is so, so important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Linda, you said teachable is teachable, coachable, and trainable, the E3 model, which you'll get the recording. And I really hope you're able to sit with your team and put these things into practice. So we've covered a lot of information here, but guys, here's the part we're most excited about, Stephanie, our next steps. Now, this is really just a precursor. This was a kickoff, if you will. Grace Hill will send more about the courses that have been curated in response to all that we want to know about D&I. Everything we've discussed in this webinar series will be sent out to you with more follow-up instructions. We'll also facilitate more conversations, and that's why it was such a perfect partnership between Grace Hill and NAA, because both organizations have had educational webinars for the last few months. Some of the topics overlapping, but very important to reiterate and drive the point home. So Stephanie, was there anything you'd like to share from the NAA side of upcoming opportunities to continue the conversation?
Absolutely. So our Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the National Apartment Association has really pushed forward a webinar series that many of you might have joined. We have hosted several webinars throughout the third quarter into the fourth quarter of this year, and those are all free for members to attend, where we have really great conversations to bring more awareness to various topics within D&I. And so we also have a great resource library that does include a white paper that is on diversity inclusion that is free to download for members. One of the things that I also want to talk just for a quick second about is that NAA has also developed an internal diversity and inclusion committee. This is separate from the NAA committee that we do with our volunteer leaders in the organization. And why this is so important that I want to share with you is because in order for us to really continue to hone in on these topics and push it through to all of our members, we have to truly understand and believe, right, everything that we're saying. And so we actually bring in speakers of our own that come in each month. And we also have subcommittees within these committees, and where we are addressing all of the different, opportunities for us to really promote that inclusive community and to really focus on diversity. We have really been talking a lot about the terminology uses that we use as an organization and how we share that information with others. And then we're also talking about our hiring practices. And I think from a national level, NAA has a great and diverse team of amazing people, but we can always do better, right? And so that's what we want. And we want to grasp this information so that we can share it with our members. And so I encourage all of you, I hope that your companies are having these conversations and that there's an opportunity to create, whether it's a committee or a task force for diversity and inclusion. And you know what? If your leaders aren't saying it in your organization, stand up and say, hi, I want to head this up, or I want to be a part of it, and try to make that happen, because you have a voice and you can use it no matter what level that you're on.
You know, one of the number one questions I receive as well, I get lots of questions in this space, and particularly from May until now, it was, how do I start? Where do I start? What are the resources? What if I'm not a person of color? Can I drive this initiative? Absolutely. It's just as, if not more critical, for you to be front facing and vocal, because allyship and advocacy, as I said, matters. I think the number one place to start is right here. There's a whole resource library of information across all of our collective organizations and our partnership. Start there. Start by making these courses essentially a mandate for your leadership, so that they're aware and setting a new precedent or standard for what we do. When I began this partnership with Grace Hill, as we formed the courses, the intent was, hey, one day, hopefully, the same way fair housing training and sexual harassment training are required onboarding courses, right, for any new hire, that diversity and inclusion training is a requirement for anyone who is responsible in leading a population of people in any segment. So I think the goal here, beyond the conversation, is really walking the talk every day when we show up for our people. So here's the punchline in all of this. We want to continue this, and we're posing a challenge to each and every one of you. Our challenge to you is to change our speech. We want to change the way we speak through our speak pledge. I love a good pledge, Stephanie, because that means we're committed. It means we're committed to evaluating ourselves, how we speak, and changing it to be more kind and empathetic to one another. So after a webinar, you'll get the recap, the recording, but you'll also get your own downloadable pledge card. And we're asking each one of you, our charge and our challenge is to print the card, share it with your team using hashtag. And Tara, help me, I forgot our hashtag.
Yes, our hashtag is hashtag capital W words matter, capital M. So I'll put it in the
Matter. Drop it in the
yes.
chat. Stephanie, I'm doing this after the webinar today. We're gonna post words matter, hashtag words matter, because they do. And our pledge states, we wrote this collectively in solidarity, and we hope you join us in it, that what I say matters. As a part of my commitment to preventing microaggressions and stopping them in our tracks when they occur, I pledge to S, slow down, P, practice, E, empathy, A, awareness, and K, kindness. Slow down, consider, and think of what we're saying. To practice this consistently in all conversations, to have empathy for all humankind, awareness of everything going on around me culturally as it concerns, marginalized populations, and have kindness in all that I do. Stephanie, any final thoughts as we have now opened our eyes to microaggressions?
This is so powerful. And I really encourage everyone to make that commitment. We're not asking for perfection here. We are all human. We are all learning as we go. We make mistakes. But I think that the commitment here is that we are going to do better, because our words do matter. And really having that opportunity to slow down and think about what we're saying, right? And practice being consistent, like Melissa said, because consistency is really, really key here. And then having that empathy, awareness, and kindness, it's going to get you so far in life, because being a good person is wonderful, but really doing as you say you do is so, so important. And so we want you to step up to the challenge. We want you to make this commitment. Melissa and I are making this commitment along with Grace Hill and our teams to really make a change. We want to speak. We want to sign the Speak Pledge. And we really, really want you all to share it with everyone. Share it with your colleagues, your friends, your family. Don't just share it with people in the industry. Share it with everyone you know. I know my family and my home will be doing this challenge and making that commitment, because I cannot tell you just how important it is.
You know, Stephanie, the number one question today was, how do I respond? I think I'm going to respond to microaggressions now with pledge cards. I'm just going to keep them. And then when I experience one, I just say, hey, here you go. I have something for you. And then
Yes.
hopefully they get it. That's my response from now on.
Listen, that's the most powerful response you could ever have, right? Is leaving it with them, letting it dwell down with them. They get to digest it and think about it. And I think that's very powerful. Maria says, challenge accepted. Love
Challenge
it.
accepted. Listen, thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with us, having an open, honest conversation about microaggressions. What we says matters. Hashtag words matter. We will continue to bring awareness to these things. Again, stay tuned for your email from Grace Hill with more on the upcoming courses and the downloadable of your pledge card. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you next time.